Good morning. This morning's Intelligence Forum's Who Are You podcast is privileged to have Keith Madeley from Yorkshire as the guest. Keith Madeley, who in 2011 received the MBE for services to the communities of Yorkshire. In 2013 was made as a lay canon of Ripon Cathedral for services to businesses and education. And there's much more than that. And of course, you haven't come to hear me speak, you've come to hear Keith Madeley. So the first question I'm going to put to Keith is, Keith, what exactly has been your professional journey to where you are today?
Interesting, Harry. I know your love of trains, and that's how my journey started. At the local grammar school, when I was about 12, 13, in Bradford, we overlooked what was the old Bradford Foster Square station. And of course, in those days, we were, at the end of the steam era as such. So all the train spotters at break time will be taking numbers and so forth. Oh, have we got that one? Class 5, etc. Jubilee. And when I think I was 14, and a few of us said, why don't we set up the Carlton Railfan Society? Keith, we will say to you, go and see the headmaster and get his permission for using the name, which I did. And I think he was quite delighted, Harry, that some 14-year-olds had got a hobby to keep them off street corners. So I started as the chairman of the Carlton Railfan Society and used to arrange permits to go around engine sheds. And we went the length and breadth of the UK. So when I was 16, all I wanted to do was join the railway. Applied through the LNER headquarters, as they were in those days, at York. Attended, passed my exam and the medical and the interview, and started at Bradford Foster Square as a clerical officer grade 4. Now, you remember, of course, in those days, it was British Rail. And every month we used to get a vacancy list come round with jobs throughout the network. And one break time, we all said, oh, look at this. And it was jobs, it was called Advanced Train Information Clerks. And we were based in marshalling yards. And the guard would go down the train with a dictaphone, take the details, number of the wagon, where it was from, where it was going to. And then we would use telex machines to translate that into a code, send it to the next marshalling yard. Anyway, we applied for these jobs. And so I was 18. It was a grade 3, quite a big promotion for me at 18, salary-wise and everything. And a few of us got interviews, and I was the last in, Harry. It was on Queen Street in the City of London. And there was the interviewing panel, the chairman, 2 wingers. And as I walked in, they were in stitches. Mr. Madeley, first of all, before you sit down, will you go look out of the window? And so, I did as I was told and turned around, come and sit down. He said, you're the third from Bradford today, and we wanted to prove to you that the streets of London were not paved in gold. Got a long story short, Harry, I got the job. So off I went to London as an 18-year-old. And I remember, because I was the only child and well looked after by mother and father. And I remember going down thinking, well, 10 years earlier, you'd have been conscripted into the army. So at least you're controlling your own destiny. I was very fortunate. A year later, I was promoted again to grade 2. And obviously, in those days, really good salaries at those grades. And then I met a colleague who today would have called him a mentor. We didn't use the word in those days, as you probably remember. And he was a relief station manager. So he used to regale me with stories of stations he'd been involved with over the years. And one day I said, Freddie, you've made my mind up. On the railway, I want to be a station manager. What do I do? So he guided me, and I went through work experience, you name it. And I came to, I was 20. They said, right, you're going to have to go through a day with a senior officer, and he will take you through running a station. And at the end of that, I was amazed. The guy, Mr. Singleton, I can still remember his name. Keith has said, I'm pleased to say you've passed. So I thought, wow, that's great. But I was 20. And everybody, all my colleagues were saying, there's no way you're going to get to manager's job till you're 25. So you can imagine my delight. Second interview in front of, again, Mr. Rogers, who interviewed me when I came from the north. And they never told you on the day, Harry. So to my amazement, at the end of the interview, we looked at the two wingers, they nodded. He sort of leaned back and then put his elbows on the table, looked at me right in the eyes. He said, Keith, now I've checked. Today we're going to appoint you to this position. You will be the youngest ever station manager on British Rail. You won't let me down, will you? No, Mr. Rogers. So I started at 21, and it was so funny on the first day. And I went through some training, obviously. And on the first day, with the rush hours over, I had two wonderful booking clerks who, I mean, I was 21, they were sort of 40s and 50s. And they always used to cook a breakfast after the 9:06, I think it was. They closed one of the booking office windows. One of them would take it in turns to cook a breakfast. I had a lovely cooked breakfast, went down to my office, a little bit nervous, as you can imagine, knock on the door, and this sort of scruffy individual came in, and I said, good morning. You're the station manager? Yes. He said, right, Mr. Madeley, I'm from BBC Television News. We want footage of you for the 6 o'clock news tonight. And I thought, wow. And I thought, well, I'm not going to get permission for this. I'll just do it. So that was my first day, Harry. I then got promoted 2 years later to assistant station manager at Orpington, which, as you probably know, is quite a big junction station.
Yeah.
And in 2016, I met this video guy, and we were working with Leeds Trinity University, and he wanted to do a documentary called Mr. Yorkshire. And he got permission from Network Rail, and we went down and did some filming back on my stations. That's on YouTube now. And
what went through your mind when you were doing that filming all those years later? Did it bring back some really good memories?
Yeah, it did. It really did. And I suppose the sad thing at Bellingham was the booking office had gone. It was all just, automatic machines. My office had no station manager on the door. The signal box had gone. I did still have my bowler hat, and I'm still with my bowler hat. A train pulled in, and people got off the train, and there's all the cameras, with this filming. What's going on? I said, I used to be the station manager here. We're doing some filming. So that I've got to say, the experience there helped me throughout my career, and still does today. The thing that I think it was the PR side, Harry, like you, passionate about railways, saddened at what was going on. It was the attitude of the trade unions in my day that made me think, can I cope with this for another 30, 40 years? No. So sadly, when I was 25, I resigned and thought I'd come back to Yorkshire. And I was summoned up to head office, and the divisional manager himself, Mr. Southgate, Malcolm Southgate, went on to be the representative, Harry, for the Channel Tunnel. He oversaw all that. He was another very successful guy. And he said, Keith, what are you doing? You're going places on the railway. And I said, look, I've decided to go back to Yorkshire. The nice thing was, because I had a young family then, he said, Keith, if it doesn't work, you ring me. There's always a job for you. So it was a nice little insurance policy, Harry, was that.
That was a lovely thing. So what happened next in your change of career?
Yeah, so back to Yorkshire, applied for several jobs, got loads and loads of interviews. And the one I really fancied was the public relations manager, would you believe, for a computer software company. Knew nothing about computers. And went for the interview. There was the chairman, the managing director. They called me back for a second interview, which I thought was interesting. Meantime, I'd actually got an offer of a job in Birmingham for a Leeds office. And I was going to take this. The phone went, and my wife just took the call, and she said, he's on an interview for another role. Please tell him, don't accept it. So on the Monday morning, I rang them, come straight in, and they said, we're pleased to tell you there's 18 applicants, 17 graduates, and the next station manager. You've got the job. So I started as public relations manager, and within 3 months, the general manager resigned. And they called me in and said, look, we're delighted what you're doing. We'd like to make you general manager. So I became general manager, company car, 25, 26, then another little, my daughter was on the way. So that was great. Learned a lot from these two guys, Harry. They were both graduates, had both done well in the different roles. And I was there for 3 years. Now, in the meantime, when I became general manager, the insurances were in a real mess. And they said, look, just sort it. And through a family friend, I picked up that my father-in-law of the day had kept talking about this John Ellis. And so I rang him and said, look, what's John doing? Oh, he said, he's just left Stenhouse, which is now part of Aon, a really big group, and set up on his own. And that was 74. So I rang him and said, look, come in. I want you to look at these insurances with a fleet of 50 cars, all individually insured. Would you believe? So group policy. And over 2 years, worked with John as his client. And then I said to him one day, I said, John, you're doing really well, but the one thing you've not got is financial services. And I said, now it sounds strange, ex-station master, but we had agencies with a mutual company called Provident Mutual. And I also had an agency with a Railway Employees Privilege Ticket Association that sold accident insurance. So I'd actually been involved to some extent. And long story short, we set that company up. We ran it together for 30 years. We were still best of buddies now. And we sold it in 2004. But the PR helped me, Harry, because that sector, and I know you were in the financial world, it was very backward in those days at coming forward. So every time we had got something different, I used to say, right, press release. And I'd go to seminars and people would say, oh, you're the jammy individual, you're always in the paper. But you see, they didn't bother. They would say, they would send one press release, it might be rejected. So they won't bother. But if you keep them coming, as you know I've done now with all sorts of things through my career, even with the cones, keep going all the time.
So with 2004, you selling the business, and of course by this time you'd acquired, a bank of knowledge and skills. So how was it that you came to acquire the brand of Mr. Yorkshire? And this wasn't a coincidence, I don't feel.
No,
tell me about it.
Yeah, okay, but very briefly, I became the chairman of the Yorkshire Society in 2002, and I was obviously, as you know, very passionate about Yorkshire. I was back in Yorkshire. I could see lots of potential. I'd enjoyed running the business initially in Bradford, then in Leeds, and when we sold the business for 3 years. They kept me on as to hand over the business to the new team. They were very, very good to me, exceptionally good. And I said, what do you want me to do? And they said, look, just keep doing your PR for us like you've done for Manor. And then one of the directors introduced me to a friend who wanted a chairman for a digital marketing agency. So met these two guys and they said, we'd love you to become our chairman. And literally after about 3 months one day, one of them came in and he said, there we are, we've bought you this domain name, MrYorkshire.com, all you do for Yorkshire. And I said, I can't use that. Who does he think he is? Well, you can use it, you will use it, and there's your website. And that particular guy, Harry, we're still, really best of friends. I was with him having a catch up a couple of weeks ago, and he's now the chief exec of one of the largest digital marketing agencies in Leeds. It's great. We just kept that relationship. So it was really Chris Jackson who came up with that idea. And
then of course, when you got a letter, perhaps it was a letter in those days. I don't know how they do it. The MBE, I mean, did you sort of open the envelope and think, this must be another Keith Madeley? I mean, how was that? How did that go?
Well, it was so funny because we'd been somewhere with friends and we'd come back and like you do, you pick the post up and you're talking to your friends and you slit open these envelopes. Actually, looking at it initially, thinking back now, I was thinking it was company's house. And so talking away, I opened this and I started to read it. And I just couldn't believe it. And I had to really sort of get hold of myself because it said, this was November, you must keep this confidential until the 31st of December. So I think my friends just sort of said, anything interesting? I said, oh, yeah. So I'll sort it later. Put the letter down. And when they'd gone, Chris said, what is it? I said, you're not going to believe it. And there we are. And I remember going down to receive that. We took one of our daughters and my granddaughter. She was only 7. And I must say the palace were wonderful with the little one. Made sure she got a good seat so she could see the ceremony. And it was quite amazing. And I remember when I arrived, a friend of mine who received the MBE about a year earlier in Leeds, and he said, do you want me to guide you in what I did? Yes, please. And he said, well, you're a member of the Leeds Club. Book yourself into the Sloane Club, which is near the palace. Hire a car, because he said it's easier to drive in than actually go and walk to the palace gates. And I remember we pulled up in this car. I was in the front, and this policeman stopped security. And what he said, who's a lucky person today, then, governor? And so I said, it's me. He said, he said, you're in luck. He said, it's a Princess Royal. He said, and she always spends time with everybody. And it was Princess Anne.
Yeah.
And she did, quite amazing. I was seeing her talking to people as you're lining up to be the next one. And as you go and obviously nod your head, and then she put the jewel on and she said, so how's things in Leeds, Mr. Madeley? And you're almost... It's quite incredible.
It's very fine. It's a very fine thing. And did you feel after that it had really been vindication for all the work you had done and all of the people you'd helped along the way, and all the people that you were going to help in the future? Did it give a sort of, a seal of approval? Did you feel a sort of warm glow?
Yes, I couldn't have put it better, Harry. Those 2 words, warm glow. And I always remember, and I've said to people afterwards who also received these honours, you can't buy them.
No.
You can't buy them. And I found out afterwards, it was an Indian friend of mine, and I'd been talking at some event, and he got his MBE, and his wife said, Dale, that man, you've got to get him an MBE. And apparently he in the background, I found out afterwards, because he'd confidentially spoken to Chris, and asked for references, and he'd sort of started that process. So I was really chuffed a bit, Harry.
So going fast forward, the Cones books. I mean, I understand that being a children's author, an author of children's books, is a very difficult thing. Your wife has accomplished a very difficult thing. To get books published is not an easy thing. Tell us about that and your role within it.
Yeah, okay. I'll cut the early parts short, but just to give you a very brief background, IFAs, we were based obviously in Bradford. We used to take a stand at the London Money Show, and we found lots of people came up and gave us business and said, it was so funny, oh, Yorkshire people, we can trust you. So we decided that, well, why don't we open an office in London? But being Yorkshireman, we didn't want to be in the centre and paying London rates. So we opened an office in Bushey near Watford. Yeah. And a family friend's son had gone down and he'd passed it to be an accountant, but he wasn't happy doing accountancy work. And in conversation, he just said one day, I'd really like to go into financial services. I said, I've got an idea, Jonathan. So he ran that for us. So Chris and I were up and down the motorway in the 1990s, and you might remember the Prime Minister, John Major, brought out the Cones hotline. And everybody sort of ridiculed him over that. So what a silly idea. But we were stuck at Leicester Forest one day, and the hoardings were on the side of the motorway. So Chris rang this number, and this charming gentleman said, "Love it to hear from you, madam. we roughly get a call a fortnight, but here's where the cones are. And she put the phone down. She'd been thinking about it with all the journeys we were doing. And everybody used to say, traffic cones get everywhere. And Chris just thought, if we think about it, when a human eye looks away, that's when the cones become characters and they're learning about human behavior. So we were talking to a friend and he said, you need to go to the International Children's Book Fair in Bologna and you'll make some connections. And all we had, Harry, were notes and a few drawings done by an artist friend. So there weren't really illustrations as such. And we went to Bologna. And I don't know whether you've ever been, but if you think Birmingham's big, goodness gracious me, it was like a city in itself. So we went around the English section and we were there for 3 days. We talked to Egmont Press, to Dorling Kindersley, the head of BBC Children's Programmes. She actually called us back to Brompton Road and said if you had 13 books published, this would make a great TV series. Sadly, she's obviously now well retired. That was about the year 2000. I never forget her. Can't remember her surname, but her first name was Rona. And I thought it's a shame I didn't remember her surname because I could have asked people, do you remember X? And then fast forward, we met Rick, and you've met Rick Armstrong, you know, yeah. And another good supporter of Intelligence Forum as Rick. And it was just through a connection. Found he was a publisher, also specialised in children's books. We had one published, but we got the wrong sort of people behind that one. But at least we had a PDF sent to him, and within minutes, Harry, and this is actually again on YouTube on the Mystery Yorkshire thing, and he came back and he said, "I love it. When can we meet?" And we sat down, the three of us together in 2014, and he said, "This is going to go." But he said, "I want to start from scratch. I don't like that format. This is my format." And again, in passing, you're quite right when you said it's not an easy market. And I just came up with an idea and said, "Look, Rick, I've got all these connections. Why don't I get the book sponsored by Corporate UK?" And there was a little bit of a, yeah, you know, I've heard that before. So I went and came back and said, "Right, Rick, we've got Jaguar Cars and Cupar. That's our first sponsors." And he went, and then, as you know, once you get like yourself, Harry, when you know you built up that library of speakers, and when people see who you've had on Intelligence Forum, it's the same with the Cones books. People, the corporates want to be involved. We now, with 3 books with Balfour Beatty, with 4 with BAM, we've just got the second book from Persimmon. They want another book on building houses because they build them differently in Scotland than they do in England. You know, it's gone from strength to strength.
It's absolutely flying, isn't it? I mean, now, Keith, I'm sensitive to time, so I'm going to ask. I could be here for several hours because you've achieved so much. But the last question I'm going to ask is: would you tell me a little bit about you being the founder of the Unity Club?
Yes, I will, Harry. I've always been a believer in clubs. I think they're very good, particularly a business type club where you can meet people. And I was the ambassador for the Leeds Club. I've been a member of the Carlton Club in London when we had the Bushy office, and that was introduced. And I just thought, just superb to have a specific venue, and you're not in a coffee shop talking confidentiality, you know. And so I was the ambassador for the Leeds Club. That was founded in 1849, and it was in a very prominent place in Leeds. And sadly, in 2013, it closed. The gentleman who then owned it, sadly, you know, he went into administration. And I thought, we cannot leave the idea of a club. I was very involved with the church, and the Trinity Shopping Centre had just been finished in 2013. I knew the guy running that. And between that and the church, they refurbished some rooms for me, and we started what was then the Trinity Club, based at the side of Holy Trinity Church on Bow Lane. Then 2016, the rector of the day said, "Look, I'm really sorry, we really need those rooms back." By which time I was involved with Leeds Beckett University, as you know, knew them. And I just happened to mention it. They said, absolutely brilliant. Business, education, together, what better, Keith? Come and we'll base you at our offices. Well, it was an exhibition centre just near the station on Quebec Street. And we were there for about 2 or 3 years. And then, as you know, we're now at the Rose Bowl, which is the business centre of the Leeds Beckett University, again, a superposition. And they sold what was then the one on Quebec Street and said, look, we still want you involved in the university. We're refurbishing these offices at the Rose Bowl, and we want you to come in there. And we've been there since then.
I mean, the last couple of questions, I think you've got a couple of honorary degrees, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes. It was so funny because I was helping Leeds Trinity University, helping build up their business section, just as a friend. And one day I was at an event and they said, you've not answered the Vice Chancellor's letter. What letter? Have you not got the letter? We'll email it to you. And I did, like the MBE, Harry. When I opened the email, they want to make you an honorary fellow of Leeds Trinity. And then that was done, a wonderful ceremony. And they have an annual honorary fellows event where you go along with Chris comes with me, and all the new honorary fellows, we all meet together. It's a wonderful interview. But then the dean of the business school at Leeds Beckett rang me, and he said, "I've just read this. We're not having that. So, a visiting fellow of Beckett."
Well, I think Keith, perhaps you'll come back and explain more at a later one, because I think there's more to dig into. But for now, I just want to thank you very much indeed for giving up your time today and giving up your time for a great many other causes as well that have actually led to people being revitalized and stimulated. So thank you very much indeed for that.
Absolute pleasure.
Thank you, Keith.